Hello everyone and welcome back to another video with On Point Politics, and today we're going to be looking at the latest New York Times / Siena College poll and why we may actually be seeing a tightening of the race occur. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you want more content just like this, and if you can, please donate to our efforts to conduct national and state polls for this year. We are on aggregates like 538, New York Times, and on the Hill, and we are currently conducting national and state polls for this presidential election. However, they do cost us money to get respondents to answer pollsters. This is also things that pollsters that are experts also have to do as well. So if you guys would be willing to donate to us, that would be greatly appreciated. The link is in the description down below. And so now looking at this, we are going into an election cycle, right, where I have Donald Trump winning with 334 electoral votes to Harris's 204 based on the margins here. However, when we actually look, we see that the latest New York Times / Siena College poll indicates a race like this would actually occur in 2024. And you may say, well, this is a little bit different than what you've usually said in your previous videos. Well, this is the thing, right? If we go to the exit polls, we see that Donald Trump won the white vote by about 16 points here. We see black voters, Joe Biden won them by a little bit over 70 points. We see Hispanic voters, that was a little bit over a 30-point win for Joe Biden. And Asian voters, Joe Biden is also winning them by a pretty considerable amount, and even won other voters by about 14 points. But when we look at the crosstabs here, Harris is actually up by a single point in the matchup for 2024. And if we actually go to their 2020 sample, which I've actually referenced to see how accurate their sample is, they have a very accurate sample here for this election. Now, some of their, Hispanic and other margins and the African American vote tend to oversample Democrats, and the white vote did underestimate Republican voters, and so did some of the demographics, but the age demographics tended to be pretty accurate, including their gender demographics. And so there may be a legitimate boost of support for Kamala Harris heading in to this cycle. And we see with third parties included, she's ahead by a point in the national popular vote. And if we were to construct a battleground for that, because of the fact that states like Minnesota, Virginia, New Hampshire, and Maine at large are trending to the left, and states like New Jersey, Delaware, and New Mexico are currently trending to the right, we would see a map like this in that national environment. And the fact that the white vote is closer than what it was in 2020, while minority groups tend to shift the other way, kind of indicates that those shifts would cancel each other out in the electoral college, and you would end up with a way closer election result. Now, if the national popular vote is only a point for Harris, I expect Donald Trump to win the Rust Belt states fairly easily, because I do believe he's going to perform better in the Rust Belt going against Kamala Harris than he would in the Sun Belt. I believe when he was going against Joe Biden, he had a much greater Sun Belt appeal than he did in the Rust Belt. And so I believe North Carolina would more than likely still be in this lean column. I mean, Joe Biden won, the popular vote by 4.5 points last time and barely won the state by a little bit over a point. I would think the state's probably a 4.5 point victory or so. Georgia, here's the interesting thing. The minority groups actually get better for Trump, but the white vote does actually narrow up. So there is a possibility that the state could potentially be within a point or so in this scenario. I believe the Rust Belt would probably be 3 points in Wisconsin, a point in Michigan, and around 2 points in Pennsylvania. That's kind of what I'm thinking for the Rust Belt. And I do think that Georgia is going to more than likely vote to the left of the Rust Belt as of right now. And that's what we are seeing in that state of Georgia because of Kamala Harris's strength in the Atlanta suburbs. We also have the state of Nevada and Arizona. I believe Nevada would still go to Donald Trump fairly easily, but Arizona is a little bit interesting. I think it would be a tilt margin for Trump if the national environment was actually Democrat +1, because of the fact the state is actually trending very heavily to the left, especially in our latest forecast. We actually have the popular vote at around 7.6 percentage points and the state is around a 10.5-point victory, indicating that the state is trending a point to the left of the nation of where it was last time. But I also think if the national environment was Democrat +1, you would see Arizona more than likely trend heavier to the left than what it would be in our current, model that we have for the election. We even see Nebraska second. This would be an effective toss-up. I'd expect Harris to maybe carry it by possibly 2 or 3 points if she were to win the popular vote by over 1. And that's kind of what we're looking at in the Electoral College if Harris were to actually win the popular vote by 1. And based off of the demographic information that they provided to us, since the white vote is closer in this matchup, that is why we see states like Kansas and South Carolina under 15 points. Any gains that Trump would have made with the minority groups like Hispanics and African Americans, which he does make in this poll, we see that Hispanics go down to a 19-point for Harris, and African Americans are about a 63-point victory for Harris. But we see white voters shift from around a 17-point victory for Trump all the way down to just about 12 or 13 points. And since white voters make up a majority of the electorate by a pretty decent amount, any gains that Trump would have made with minority voters basically cancel out. Now, this is not my final prediction, as I do believe that Donald Trump is really looking at something like this, but this is the first national poll that samples back to 2020 that not only shows an accurate sample for 2020 and relatively accurate crosstabs, we actually have them having Kamala Harris up by a single point. Now, is she going to maintain this lead as the campaign goes on? We will see if that's going to be the case. If she starts gaining in the polling data and in favorability, she may possibly be able to actually make this election somewhat competitive. However, I do believe that Trump would still be the favorite, even if she were to lead the aggregate by 3 or 4 points, mainly because of the fact that Donald Trump's approval rating is higher than hers. And also, we have the fact that Donald Trump appeals mostly to Rust Belt voters more so than Harris does. Harris doesn't really have any strong appeal in the Rust Belt. So realistically, Donald Trump could hold the state of North Carolina, which he won twice. And if he were to hypothetically lose Georgia and Arizona and Nevada, he would still win the Electoral College. If he were to win Nevada and lose North Carolina, we would actually have an Electoral College tie that would go to the House of Representatives. And I could actually see this happening because Nevada actually has somewhat of a more Hispanic population. And I only see this happening if the race is actually close, because I feel like Harris may do better with that kind of suburbanite, older white voter and do better with African American voters. That would help her in Arizona and also help her in Georgia and North Carolina. However, if Harris is winning the national popular vote by a single point, I do believe this would be the map. But again, this is not, just to preface, this is not my final prediction. I know people are going to screenshot this and say, oh, this is his final prediction, but this is merely what this national poll is showing for the election. And we may be headed, if the trend continues, Harris may actually make this somewhat competitive and get it out of this landslide margin that I have for Donald Trump in my current election model, which is him winning the Electoral College fairly easily. This is something that would definitely be possible if this margin in the popular vote does hold up, where Harris is winning by about a point. Now, the head-to-head matchup does actually have Donald Trump up by a pretty decent amount, by about a single point, if he were to in fact win the popular vote in the two-way matchup. And what's also interesting as well is some of the demographic margins look a little bit better for him here as well, which I think is pretty interesting, including with older voters. That demographic seems to improve for him a little bit in the head-to-head matchup. Even in the Midwest, he seems to do better in a head-to-head. So that is pretty interesting. If Donald Trump were to win the popular vote by about a point, we would more than likely see Kansas, South Carolina be safe Republican. Alaska would be safe. Colorado, Illinois would fall under the likely category, and states like Minnesota and Virginia would be close to being, in the lean column. New Mexico would probably be in that lean Democrat column. Nebraska would be likely. Oregon would be in that likely Democrat column. Rhode Island, Connecticut, maybe not Rhode Island, but possibly Connecticut would be in the likely column. This is something I would probably see in terms of a battleground map if Trump were to win the popular vote by a point. If he were to kind of expand his lead from here to 2 to 3 points, 3 points is what the aggregate has. Washington would, fall under a certain margin. Minnesota, Virginia would get, a little bit closer, including New Hampshire and Maine at large. Nebraska second would already flip by then, and states like Iowa and Ohio probably already go in that safe column by the time we would get there anyway. And even a state like Florida may possibly be reaching that column. Georgia, North Carolina, if Trump wins the popular vote by about 2 to 3, you may see that end up being in that column, as well as Arizona and Nevada at that point, because those states do vote to the right of the nation by about 2 to 3 points. And so that's why you would see those probably end up in the likely column. So at that point, Donald Trump would be expanding his lead. But in terms of the current electoral college scenario based out of the New York Times / Siena College poll, we see a pretty competitive election than what would have been expected with Kamala at the top of the ticket. And again, guys, I have to report this as honestly as I possibly can. I'm not going to sit here. Everybody claims that I'm this, Trump aligned, pollster. But if polls that we use on a weekly and daily basis to prove that Trump is winning big are now showing a more competitive race, I can't simply be here and just ignore that and say, well, actually there's something wrong with this. Now, are other pollsters that have Harris by 2 or 4 points, are there pollsters that are actually oversampling Democrats? Yes, 100%. Again, this would actually be the outlier poll that actually has an accurate sample for the most part. Harris is actually up by a point here with likely voters. Realistically, this would be the outlier poll if they were to actually, if all the other pollsters weighed their polls accurately by party to factor in the response bias from Democrats. Even here, to be honest with you, they actually have a pretty big leaning when it comes to this. You see their sample here, believe it or not, was actually a pretty high sample when it came to the national vote share for Democrats here. Even their sample actually leaned a little bit to the left here, believe it or not. And this is something that a lot of pollsters have been doing lately that has been skewing their results to the left, but they accounted that for going into certain margins. Kind of looking at their sample, we see that their sample is around D+4. So if you were to basically correct that to a tied popular vote, you would probably get Trump up by 3, which is that previous map I had previously constructed. But their 2020 sample and some of their crosstabs are pretty accurate. Now, what I did was I cross-examined their 2020 crosstabs with their 2024 ones and compared it to the exit polls for 2020 and actually kind of crafted a map based off of that using the 538 demographics. So you would plug in the correct age demographics, the corrected college and non-college demographics, the corrected female and male demographics, and the corrected racial demographics. And if you actually break it down by race, Trump is up 326 to 212. He actually wins the major swing states and Virginia, but does not win New Mexico. So that is something pretty fascinating that I didn't think would actually be the case. And if we go up here, we'd actually see that I basically put all of these margins together and basically put them down here. And Arizona is a 5.5 point victory for Trump. Georgia 7 points. Florida's about a 10-point win. California is a 22-point victory. Minnesota is still Democrat. New Hampshire is a 1.5 to flipping. You have Virginia being a lean margin of 2.6 percentage points. Pennsylvania is a likely margin with Wisconsin, and Nevada is approaching that 5-point win. Nebraska second would be lean. North Carolina is an 8-point win. Maine at large is under 5 points. So clearly there is a little bit of a development for Donald Trump. If you were to actually do the cross-examination from their 2020 crosstabs, Donald Trump is getting closer to winning Minnesota, Virginia, and other states, but the electoral count would still stand. The only extra one he would be getting here is Nebraska second. So even adjusting to correct the crosstabs and plugging in the data to the 538 demographic model, you still get a more competitive race than this. And so I'm just making this video just in case Harris actually starts gaining in the data to let everybody know that this is a real possibility that she could actually be gaining on Donald Trump as the weeks come. Now, again, this may be a honeymoon surge for her, or maybe it's something a little bit more permanent. Maybe there are a lot of white resist liberals and also a lot of older suburbanite voters that would be willing to vote for Harris, despite the fact that they were previously not going to vote for Biden. This may have to have done with his mental health. Now, if Trump's campaign can attack Harris effectively on some of her liberal policies and also go at her for the fact that she was in charge of the border, and if Americans really are distasteful to the fact that she was basically responsible for covering up Biden's mental illness, then that definitely could play a factor into making the race more competitive. Another thing that people are not talking about is the fact that Biden realistically was forced out of his own nomination process. I mean, he literally got 14.5 million votes in a primary and was forced out of his own will, essentially, because Democrats threatened to remove him by using the 25th Amendment. And so you kind of have a nominee with 0 votes, and that may be a problem for her with Democrat turnout. And you could see Biden get a point or two in terms of write-in voting. That could hurt her margin, and that could completely change the race and make something like this even more possible as of right now. And so if you guys did enjoy this analysis, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you want more content just like this. And I will see you guys in the next video.